Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. As we approach the 2024 election, Republicans are still obsessed with the 2020 election. Donald Trump's big lie of a stolen election has become the ideological tentpole of today's Republican Party, which is why just this afternoon, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson made the pilgrimage down to Mar-a-Lago to hold a so-called election integrity summit with the ex-president. Now, election integrity might seem like an innocuous enough phrase. Surely everyone wants our elections to be carried out properly. But Republicans have weaponized the concept in a really insidious way. When they say election integrity, they really just mean the big lie. And there's a reason for that, because what many of them actually believe about that election sounds nuts.
The Dominion voting systems, the Smartmatic technology software, and the software that goes in other computerized voting systems here as well, not just Dominion, were created in Venezuela at the direction of Hugo Chavez to make sure he never lost an election.
Okay, this is, as we've established many times, transparent nonsense. Obviously untenable to say the ghost of Hugo Chavez hacked the voting machines, or that, this is another one, the Chinese government smuggled bamboo paper into the ballots, or, and this is another one, the Italian satellites rigged the vote count. Not to mention the fact that if you do say that stuff, you might just lose your law license or get sued for $800 million. Just ask Fox News. So you can't go around sounding like Sidney Powell, unless you're Trump, but everyone else doesn't, okay? At the same time, Republicans are kind of caught in a bind, right? Because they can't say the truth that the election was not stolen from Donald Trump, that 7 million more Americans chose Joe Biden over Trump because Trump was a bad president and a bad person who a majority of Americans rejected twice. So that brings us to the slightly more respectable version of the stolen election conspiracy, what I like to call the gentleman's big lie. You're probably familiar with it. We've been hearing it since the last election.
A word about Pennsylvania, which is a state that I have been focused on, objected to, as an example of why people are concerned, millions of Americans concerned about our election integrity. Last year, Pennsylvania elected officials passed a whole new law that allows universal mail-in balloting and did it irregardless of what the Pennsylvania Constitution said.
This election was not stolen. Do you accept that fact?
Well, what I would say is that the debate over whether or not there was fraud should occur. There were several states in which the law was changed by the Secretary of State and not the state legislature. To me, those are clearly unconstitutional.
Okay, so that was the version of the sort of gentleman's big lie. In fact, that was part of the amicus brief, part of the lawsuits signed onto by members of the Senate, right? Instead of saying, you know, the Sidney Powell line, the Venezuelan socialists are haunting the voting machines, they put forward a more respectable lie. This idea that some states loosening some rules to make it safer for people to vote during a, let's remember, once-in-a-century pandemic is tantamount to the election being stolen. These so-called concerns about the integrity of our elections are just a more polite means of whining about non-existent widespread voter fraud. And to be clear, it's all bad faith lies. Take that clip I played a moment ago from Republican Senator Josh Hawley, Missouri, which I believe that is on the evening of January 6th. I think they're back in the building maybe, or right around then, right? He's talking about why he objected. It's right around then. I remember Mitt Romney's death glare. Now, what Hawley neglected to mention was that it was the Republican Pennsylvania legislator that voted to loosen restrictions on mail-in voting. And in fact, they did it before the pandemic in 2019, not in 2020, as he said. What's more, the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court unanimously upheld the 2020 election under that law. But Josh Hawley from Missouri didn't like it. The fact that these so-called concerns about the election laws or the changes totally fall apart under even the smallest amount of scrutiny has not prevented them from becoming the respectable party line.
I think there were lots of problems with 2020.
He won the election.
Pardon?
But ultimately, he won the election, but there were lots of problems with the 2020 election, 100%.
And that's fair.
But I don't think he won it fair. I don't. I'm not going to say that.
I'm not here to litigate 2020. I'm running in 2024. I'm running for the U.S. Senate. But I do say we have to get confidence back in our election system.
Is your confidence back?
Look, is there concerns? Yes, of course. But you know, again, I don't want to spend my time talking about 2020. I'm talking about 2024.
When they changed the rules for COVID, I think that was wrong. I think some of those changes were unconstitutional. I don't think it was the perfect election. I remember after a lot of the media was saying this is the most secure election in history. How could it be the most secure with those millions of mail ballots going out? At the same time, at the time after the election, they were talking about Maduro stealing votes on the voting machines or whatever, and none of those theories proved to be true.
Wait, what? Okay. Again, we could have played lots more of that. John Paulson, the big hedge fund guy who's a Trump supporter, basically said the same line this week. So here's what happened again, because everyone seems to have a memory hole of this period that we all lived through. There was a once-in-a-century pandemic, killed about 1 million people, in which people could not gather without risking mass contagion of a serious respiratory virus. And so states pivoted to allow people to vote by mail or to vote in other fashions, like dropping off ballots in sealed boxes that would allow them to securely vote and also to not risk infection. And every attempt to challenge the results of that election was thrown out of court. Every audit showed that there was zero systemic widespread fraud. There was not any systemic fraud. There is zero evidence that measures designed to allow folks to vote safely did anything but allow folks to vote safely. Probably allowed more folks to vote. So then what's the problem exactly? The concerns that, well, the thing the Republicans are really mad about is that too many people voted against Donald Trump. So at the end of the day, Republicans just don't like democracy when they lose, which means they don't like democracy. They believe they should run the country by default. They believe the votes of their opponents are suspect, that they shouldn't count. They just don't trust that those people are there, but they are. So that is why, just like Kevin McCarthy before him, Mike Johnson went down to Florida to kiss Trump's ring today.
The speaker is required to fly around the country and be with all of our candidates and incumbents all around. I've been to, I think, 23 states now in the last several weeks, and everywhere we go, one of the first questions that people ask about is this issue of election integrity.
Well, I wonder why that is, Mike. Could it be that you've been beating them over the head with this lie for 4 years in this hermetically sealed little bubble you've created? So, yes, it's all just a way to launder the big lie and January 6th into something slightly more palatable. In reality, it is still the big lie all the way down. It is all just a justification for Trump's attempted coup and the deadly insurrection that followed and what he wants to do now, which is finish the job. 3 years ago, we saw blood spilled in the Speaker's lobby. Now, not only is the sitting Speaker of the House defending those armed insurrectionists, saying they need to be protected from prosecution, he is also defending the lies that sent them to the Capitol in the first place.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.